Hey guys, welcome to another episode of The Completionist. I'm back for the winter season, guys, so my apologies that I haven't been able to make content, in quite a long time, but unfortunately that's what happens, when you work away from home for 8 months of the year, but I've been home since December 17th, so I've had a good month break so far, and I don't have to go back for work until April, so I wanted to make the most out of the time that I had home and actually get some content made for YouTube. So more importantly, guys, thanks for your patience, and thanks for staying subscribed to the channel. So the first video that I wanted to make was that I wanted to talk about a video game that is very important with regards to overall video game history, and it's even important to the world of Japanese role-playing games. And that game is Final Fantasy VII. And I wanted to talk about, what this game actually means to me. Now, one of the reasons why I actually wanted to take on this topic, guys, is that, we have the Final Fantasy VII Remake, coming up in April. And it's actually a video game title I'm actually looking forward to playing. Not only playing myself, but actually watching, my wife play it. But it's not only that, guys, but in the year 2019 was pretty much non-existent to me with regards to the world of video games. Like, in 2019, I never had an opportunity to play one new release that was released that year, and whatever video games I did play in the year 2019 was pretty much retro titles. And I think that's one thing that I've accepted as I'm getting older, because I am turning 40 years old this year, and I notice as I'm getting older and older, I don't have as much time to dedicate towards video games as what I'm used to. So I pretty much decided that I'm not going to keep up with current gaming trends anymore, and I'm just going to stick to playing a lot of retro titles that I might have missed out growing up. But this year we have an exception, because we have a remake of a game that is actually very important to me. So I'm actually very excited to actually see this game and what Square Enix actually did with it. The funny thing with me and Final Fantasy VII is that out of all the Final Fantasy games that I've ever played, Final Fantasy VII is not my favorite Final Fantasy game. I don't even think it's in my top 3 with regards to Final Fantasy games. But even though it's not my favorite Final Fantasy game out of the entire franchise, I still think to this day it is the most important one. And the fact that it is the most important game in the Final Fantasy franchise is pretty much the reason why it's getting remade. And I certainly hope that the Final Fantasy VII Remake has the same impact that the original game had in 1997. Because I truly do believe that, Final Fantasy VII is a timeless classic. Because I often hear a lot of people say that, that Final Fantasy VII has aged horribly. But I often use the saying that it's not games that age horribly, it's our attitudes towards games that age horribly, because I always believe in the timeless aspect of games, and I can't deny the timeless aspect of Final Fantasy VII, because it is that important to the grand scheme of video game history. And why this game really means so much to me is because without the success of Final Fantasy VII, we would have never had a huge surge of Japanese role-playing games for the PlayStation 1. I think back in the Super Nintendo days, I think Squaresoft, which is what they were known at the time, did a really great job of building up a really solid foundation for JRPGs in general, especially when you had games like Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, and Secret of Mana. But for as great as those games were, I don't believe that they helped popularize the JRPG genre, because we were just lucky to get them, especially for a Western audience. But I think the moment that Final Fantasy VII came into the fray, and the fact that it sat on top of a very solid base that these great JRPGs had built, then that caused a huge surge of JRPGs to be released in the West. And if it wasn't for the success and the commercialization of Final Fantasy VII, then I would have never had a chance to play games, such as like Parasite Eve, and Final Fantasy VIII, and pretty much my favorite game of all time, which is Xenogears. And I don't think those games would have ever been released in the Western market if it wasn't for Final Fantasy VII. And I think that's probably the biggest reason why Final Fantasy VII means the world to me, is because it helped popularize the JRPG genre. And I don't think there's ever been a Japanese role-playing game that has popularized a genre so much as what Final Fantasy VII has did for that genre. With regards to my personal history when it comes to Final Fantasy VII, I never had a chance to play it until Christmas of 1999. I've often talked about it in many of my videos that, it was very rare for me to keep up with a lot of the newest and greatest trends in video games, because it seemed like I was always behind. I didn't have the same access to video games that a lot of other people had, and I still to this day remember how I got my copy of Final Fantasy VII. My parents had actually came and visited me at university in the fall of 1999, and obviously they asked what I wanted for Christmas, and going to a lot of rooms in the university residence and watching people play these really great PlayStation 1 games. I wanted a PlayStation. And the only game I was really interested in playing for at that time was actually Final Fantasy VII, because I had read so many articles about it. I seen the game on commercials, and I had already kind of got my feet wet with regards to playing JRPGs, because I had played Breath of Fire, and I've played Final Fantasy VI, and even to this day Final Fantasy VI is still my favorite Final Fantasy game in the entire Final Fantasy series. And I was really excited to play Final Fantasy VII, and even though I had watched a little bit of gameplay that people had played of it, I never actually had a chance to play the game myself. And one thing I am very grateful for is that despite not having a chance to play Final Fantasy VII until 2 years after its release, nothing was ever spoiled to me. I never knew about Aerith's death until it came time for me to actually play the game. And I think I was better off not knowing that, because it made the impact of that scene that much more powerful, because me, like a lot of other gamers, I did get teary-eyed during her death, because she was such a kind and endearing character. And it's someone that when you did play the game for the first time, you did not expect would be killed so soon into the game. And it's so funny, because these days I don't really care about spoilers. I generally go out of my way to actually have stuff, spoiled for me. But back then I was actually pretty grateful that that death and a lot of aspects of that game did not get spoiled for me. So I'll forever be grateful for that. So I asked my mom to pick up this game for me at Walmart. I was actually there at the time Final Fantasy VII actually had a greatest hits label, you know, the green label, and at Walmart they were selling them for super cheap. Like there was like rows and rows of them, and they only cost like 11 or 12 bucks, and in my parents' eyes, you know, that was a great deal, you know, for a video game, and something I was definitely going to get my money out of. And the only reason why I remember when I got Final Fantasy VII is because my mom was going to get us a PlayStation, but it was a shared PlayStation. It was going to be a shared PlayStation between me and my younger brother. So we each got to pick one game each that, you know, that we'd get for Christmas. So I picked Final Fantasy VII, and my brother picked Driver. You know, the first Driver game for the PlayStation 1. And throughout the entire Christmas holiday, I tried to play as much Final Fantasy VII as I could, but when it came time for the Christmas holiday to be over and I had to go back to university, unfortunately I had to leave the PlayStation behind because my younger brother was still going to high school at the time, and so I had to leave the PlayStation and Final Fantasy VII back in my hometown, and I never had a chance to play it again until I finished my winter semester and, you know, I went back home during the spring. So, but I had an enjoyable time playing that game. And even though I can understand people's complaints about, you know, about the character models being all blocky and you don't see the mouse, that has no impact on me right now when it comes to playing the game. I could play the game right now and still enjoy it now just as much as I did back then. And even at this current point in time, I do have Final Fantasy VII fully completed to 100%, and it is permanently retired. Now, this copy of Final Fantasy VII is not my copy. It's actually my wife's copy. And my wife got this game shortly after it was released, and one of the greatest things about when she picked up the game is that she didn't know it until much later, but she actually picked up the misprint copy of Final Fantasy VII, and the misprint black label is actually one of the most desired collectibles when it comes to all the ways that, you know, Final Fantasy VII has been released in a physical format, and the misprint is actually in the back of the case, you know, in the word masterpiece right here, you know, where the letter I is actually out of place. So it's actually a highly desired video game collectible to actually get a misprint black label copy of, you know, Final Fantasy VII. And this game has actually had a great impact in my wife's life too. Because as I said before, you know, earlier in the video, you know, it does suck that the game did get delayed, because the original release date for Final Fantasy VII Remake was March the 3rd. So I was going to have an entire month from March the 3rd to April the 3rd to actually, you know, watch my wife play this game. And now that's not going to happen because the game gets released April the 10th, and I'm already going to be out in northern Alberta, you know, by the time April 3rd rolls around. So I'm gonna miss out on actually watching my wife play it. Because one of my favorite video game memories, especially in the last couple of years, was actually watching my wife play Final Fantasy 15. And that was such an enlightening and wonderful experience, because my wife played a lot of PlayStation 1 RPGs, but as we slowly got into the PS2 and the PS3, you know, her interest in video games greatly waned, and she doesn't have the interest in video games as what she used to. And I, to this day, I still believe that the PlayStation 1 has the greatest lineup of JRPGs ever released. They have games with such incredible storylines, with such incredible music, and I don't think JRPGs from many different consoles have even remotely touched the quality of games that ever got released to that system. Because for the longest time, I really believed that the Super Nintendo was my favorite video game system of all time because it's what I grew up on. It's what I played, a lot of games for. But when I look back on it and I look at the games that had the biggest impact in my life and actually made me proud to be a gamer because of the amount of quality games that system had, I really think it was the PlayStation 1. Especially, when you look at my favorite game of all time, which is Xenogears, and you have games, such as Metal Gear Solid, which I actually really enjoyed as well. And there's still a lot of great JRPGs for the PlayStation 1 that I haven't even played yet. I haven't played Star Ocean 2, The Second Story. I barely played Valkyrie Profile. I barely played Vagrant Story. And it's just, these are games that I would rather be playing than any of the new releases right now. But when it comes to the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I'm actually really excited to see it. I'm very excited to see what they're going to do with it. But one thing that I've learned, especially with video games these days, is I don't build high expectations, but I don't build low expectations either. I just keep myself grounded because I try not to hype myself up for it, because ultimately I don't want to be disappointed. In a way, as much as it does suck that the game did get delayed, I would rather Square Enix put out the best product that they possibly can instead of putting out something that's going to require patches and fixes later on. And I would like to think that Square Enix is putting their best effort into making this game as enjoyable as it is, because Final Fantasy VII is important to not only the JRPG genre, but to video games in general. And, for as much as I do want the Final Fantasy VII Remake to be successful, and it wouldn't surprise me if it did, it wouldn't surprise me, if it beat all the records that, the original Final Fantasy VII did. Is it going to have the same impact that the original Final Fantasy VII had? And as much as I would like to believe it will, there's always that possibility that it won't, because you are literally retelling the same story that we're all aware of. You're just putting a giant coat of polish over it. And there are ways that they are actually building and expanding on this story that it could end up being a much better experience than what the original Final Fantasy VII had. But there are going to be certain aspects that we already know about, because we know Aerith is going to die. We know the main villain of the series is Sephiroth. We know what some of the highlights of the game is going to be. But having those scenes seen in a different way, with a brand new engine, with a brand new video game graphics, is it going to have that same impact as the original did? And that's an answer that nobody can give until we actually play the game for the first time. But I think one of the things I do look forward about when people do get an opportunity, to play Final Fantasy VII, is that the original game is 23 years old right now. And basically all of us who grew up on this game, a lot of us are now married, we have kids, and we're in a different position in our lives than what we were when that game initially got released in 1997. And you know what? Even though I'm never going to become a parent myself, I think for us who are now married and have kids, I would love to hear the stories of parents actually watching their kids play this game for the first time and seeing the amazement and the bewilderment in their eyes that we had when we first played this game for the first time. Even though I'm sure for a lot of us, it'll be pretty hard, to wrestle the game, from our kids, because we want to try to relive those memories that we actually had towards Final Fantasy VII. But by the time I actually get home to get a chance to play it, I'm sure my wife will probably already play the game and have it finished up to whatever point that this game is going to be. Obviously it's the Final Fantasy VII Remake is not going to be the full game, but I have no idea where the game is going to end off before we get the next segment of the Final Fantasy VII game. But I truly hope it really ends up being an enjoyable experience for my wife, and I really hope it ends up being an enjoyable experience for me. When I get a chance to play it. Hopefully this summer. When I get home for about 10 or 11 days, I can actually give it a try myself. Because I still believe to this day that the PlayStation 1 has the best lineup of JRPGs ever made. And if it wasn't for the success of this game and everything it stands for and the universe that it created with all the other games that they made based on this world, such as Crisis Core and Dirge of Cerberus and so many other games taking place in the Final Fantasy VII world, that it just has that much of a tremendous impact. And that's what I'm really thankful for. Because without this game, we would have never had the surge of awesome JRPGs for the PlayStation 1. And that is the biggest thing that I will always be thankful for this game. This game, as I said before, it is not my favorite game in the Final Fantasy franchise, but I think it is the most important. And I certainly hope this remake not only meets people's expectations, but it also exceeds them as well. Because it is a long time coming, and it is something that a lot of people have asked for a really long time. So regardless if you're playing this game yourself, or if you're watching your kid play it, I hope it ends up being an enjoyable experience for you, as much as it has for my wife and I when we get a chance to play it for the first time. So anyway guys, those are my thoughts of what Final Fantasy VII truly means to me, and I want to thank you for watching this video. So I'll definitely have some new content released over the next couple of months, so I hope you enjoy it, and as always, take care, and I wish you nothing but the best. Later.